Okay, so this is still principles of assessment. So allow me to talk about another important principle, which says that assessment requires the use of appropriate measures. So when I say, guys, appropriate measures, your appropriate measures indicates that your assessment should be valid and reliable. So again, you are reminded of the definition of validity. When I say validity, class, your assessment should be able to measure what it intends to measure. Again, class, it should be able to measure what it intends to measure. And then when I talk about reliability, when I talk about reliability, class, it is measuring consistently or accurately. When I talk about reliability, it means that you are measuring something consistently or accurately. Now, when you're talking about your assessment, students, you are reminded that you need to focus based on your outcomes. Okay, we need to focus based on our outcomes. Now, let's say, for example, that your outcomes indicate that you would want the student to demonstrate the steps. Okay, let's say, for example, the steps in making a mixture. For example, that's your outcomes. You would want the students to demonstrate the steps in making the mixture. Guys, your examinations or your quizzes should be about that, should be about the steps in making the mixtures. Pag yun ang outcome na gusto mong fokusan. Ibig sabihin, class, you do not ask your students, for example, what you call this? You do not ask them to bring to buy expensive solutions. Kasi class mixture, di ba, may solution, may colloid, at saka suspension. So you do not need to ask them to bring expensive solutions because that is not part of the experiment that you are having. Instead, what activities can you do? Maliban sa quiz, no? Kung i-quiz mo to, class, ang steps in making a solution, kalalabasan, you will just ask them to order. You will ask just them to order. Another thing that you can do is you can ask them to draw the steps. Sir, paano kapag hindi marunong mag-drawing yung estudyante? Plus, you are not grading the drawing by itself, but you are actually grading the steps that they are demonstrating in the drawing. Okay? Di ba, class, for example, may iba ka na kumakadrawing ng person, parang ang detailed ng eyes, napaka-detailed ng lips, tapos yung iba, class, pag mag-drawing ng person, ganito yung drawing. Okay? So pag ganyan ang drawing, tanggapin mo because what you are actually having there is the steps in making of a mixture, but not exactly the drawing by itself unless you are a drawing class. So pag drawing class ka, ibang usapan na naman yan. Now, another also class, since you would want them to demonstrate, you may also have your laboratory activity. Now, that makes your activity to be valid. But for example, no, ito po yung goal mo, demonstrate the steps in making a mixture. Tapos pinagawa mo sila ng essay. Tapos yung tanong sa essay mo, reflect on the importance of mixture. That question, class, is not relevant. It's not valid because it's not relevant to the topic that you would want them to dwell on. Okay? Then, class, when we talk about reliability, it means that whenever the student will be taking the same assessment again, over and over again, class, the same outcomes, no? The same outcomes, class, will be demonstrated. Okay? So the same outcomes yung pinapakita. Halimbawa, bibigay ko yung exam ngayon kay Mary. Pagkabukas, class, pagbigay ko ng exam kay Mary, the same pa rin yung score ni Mary at the same pa rin yung pagkakaintindi ni Mary sa atin. Okay? Now, another concern natin dito sa validity and reliability is the grammar that we have. Oftentimes, students would be raising concerns that they cannot understand the question because the grammar daw is wrong. Okay, class, if you have grammatical errors po regarding your examination will not be considered valid. So pag magkaganon po, pag binasa niyo yung question, halimbawa nag-exam na tayo, tapos nag-raise ng concern, kunwari si Kim, sabi ni Kim, sir, hindi naman maintindihan yung question. When I read the question and then I could not understand it, I don't have the choice but to scrap out the items. Okay? Scrap out the items that I could not understand. Now, let's say for example, your examination would say that Jose Rizal was the hero of the Philippines. Tapos yung question mo, true or false. Okay? Question mo, true or false. Now, the student answered true. Eh, sino ba naman yung hindi makakakilala ng national hero, di ba? So alam natin, true siya. That Jose Rizal was the hero. That's the answer of your student. Whereas, for you, false. Kasi sabi mo, bakit siya naging false? Kasi yung word dito is was. Okay? Kasi yung word dito is was. Dapat daw, sabi mo, hindi daw dapat was, kasi dapat is. Kasi presently, si Rizal, hero pa rin ng Pilipinas, hindi daw past na hero ng Pilipinas si Rizal. Now, if you're getting my point here, okay, if this is your emphasis, the is or the was, you are making your students confused. Okay, you are making your students confused. So kung hindi tenses of the verb yung topic mo, huwag kang magganon sa exams mo. Kasi hindi naman yan ang focus mo. Now, I don't know if you have encountered, sige nga, mag-random questions or mag-survey tayo. Sino sa inyo naka-encounter ng mga wrong grammar sa exams? Sige na, mag-like react or mag-heart react. Naka-encounter ba kayo ng examinations na wrong grammar? Ha? Mga ganon? Diba? So, commonly nangyayari siya. Diba? Common po siyang nangyayari. Kaya kayong mga teachers, tayong mga future teachers, dapat po, kung may mga ganon kayong nai-encounter, okay? Or kayo mismo, kapag kayo yung mismo magkamali, please acknowledge your mistakes so that you will be able to. So, if you are encountering examinations with wrong grammars, actually class, pwede din kayong mag-feedback sa teacher ninyo. You can actually tell the teacher, ma'am, the question sound confusing because I was not able to understand the question. Other than that, guys, pag kayo naman yung nag-wrong grammar, please be open-minded. Okay? Now, ano naman ang common pitfall, no? Ito medyo ibang topic na to sa assessment, pero I need to remind you on this. Now, for example, if you have a 20-item quiz, no? May 20-item quiz tayo. Tapos halimbawa yung question number 4 and question number 5 na find out mo wrong grammar. And dahil because of that wrong grammar, there is a big tendency that your students will get the answers incorrectly kasi wrong grammar. Ang usual pong ginagawa natin is, di ba ginagawa natin tong bonus? Di ba sasabihin bonus, okay, check ka na lang dyan, check ka na lang dyan. The ideal way supposedly for you to do it is to remove this from the number of items. So instead that if you're having a 20-item exam, yung magiging exam mo na lang is out of 18 dahil 2 items are not valid and not reliable. Pag gagawin kasi siya nating bonus, kalalabasan, tataas yung scores ng students pero it does not reflect their actual performance in the examination. Okay? So, to ensure that the examination would be valid and reliable, one way for us to do it is to reduce the number of items, to reduce the number of items. Now, ang problema mo naman dyan, pag lahat mo na lang items, wrong grammar, iti good luck to you. Okay? Now, guys, we are not belittling you. And let's be honest, some of us actually are having difficulty with grammar. Okay? Some of us are actually having difficulty with grammar and sentence construction. As early as now, try to improve your skills by having a colleague, by having a friend, by having a classmate, read your output before you would proceed. Okay? Before you would proceed with the submission of your output. Or else, class, magkakaproblema kayo hanggang later on. Next, when I say appropriate measures, your assessment should also be challenging. Huwag po kayong always nagbibigay ng mga giveaway quizzes at saka giveaway requirements. Sometimes nagsasabi yung teachers na, uy, pasa kayo ng requirements, reading lang naman yung requirement, perfect din naman kayong lahat, pampataas ng grade. That is a very wrong type of assessment. When you talk about assessment, you should challenge the mind of your students. So if you would want them to pass something, make sure that that something would trigger their minds to think. Next, it should also be age appropriate. So if you're dealing with elementary students naman, for example, grade 1, ganito na lang. If you're thinking about elementary education, guys, can you recall the times na dahil sa pagkarami-rami ng requirement, sino yung gumagawa ng requirement? Is it the pupil or the mother na who is doing the requirement? Sino yung gumagawa ng requirement sa elementary? Pag masyadong mahirap yung requirements, pag masyadong demanding yung requirements, sino po yung nagdi-deal ng requirements natin? Yes. Di ba? Mother, no? Mother. Guys, pag ikaw yung teacher, Tapos alam mo din, the mothers are doing the requirements. Gising ka po, ha? Gising po bilang teacher. Ha? Si ate daw. Itong isa nakaka-relate, may hugot to sa buhay. Baka siya yung pinapagawa ng assignment ng kapatid niya. Okay? So class, pag magkaganon, kumbaga, gising ka, wake up call yan sa'yo. If it is not the child who is doing the requirements, what's the use po? What's the use po? Ha? Hindi po si mother yung student natin. Ha? Hindi po si mother ang student natin. So class, that's why if you are a teacher, it's wise also for you to notice if the mother is the one making the requirements. Take note my term ha, notice, do not reprimand. Okay? Kasi pag sasabihin mo, alam mo anong ginagawa ng mga mother, late ko din na-notice, no? Kapag pupunain mo yung bata, tapos sasabihin na, ay, si mama mo sigurong gumawa nito, ano? Alam mo class, anong ginagawa ng mga mother? Even though they are right-handed, they would use their left hand to write the requirements of their children. Na-experience yung ganon? Ha? Yung nagpe-pretend the left-handed para lang matapos yung requirements. So nakakainis. Actually nakakainis, no? Because it defeats the purpose of assessment. So when you are making the requirements, make sure it's age appropriate. And if you would want to know what are the age appropriate tools, you can always go back to the lessons on stages of development. Okay? Balik kayo class sa stages of development. Makikita nyo yan. Even if you would just look at Erik Erikson, di ba class, Erik Erikson would talk about trust versus mistrust, and then autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority. So if you are dealing with kindergarten, grade 1 to 3 students, you can make use of this developmental task. Now, you can make use of this developmental task. No? So hindi pwede na grade 1 sabihan mo, write an essay about the life of Jose Rizal. Pagkatapos, pag may masubmit na essay, happy ka. So class, wag kayong maglokohan. Ha? It should be age appropriate. Okay? Now, in the same way, if you would look at it actually, when is sex education introduced? When is sex education introduced? Elementary, high school, senior high, or college? When is sex education introduced?
High
Elementary,
school,
high
High
school.
school, sir.
Sige, iba? Grade 5. Ikaw ha, grade 5 ka pa lang, alam mo na yan. Na-judge si Jamie. Okay? Actually, class, correct. Sex education is introduced as early as elementary. Okay? And then class, it would be followed through high school, from the junior high school, senior high school, tsaka papuntang college. Now, when we talk about sex education kasi guys, it does not actually mean that we will be talking about sex. It does not actually mean that we will be talking about condom. But as early as elementary, we introduce to them the concept of puberty. We introduce to them the term that we already have, what we refer to as your sex organs. So class, age appropriate. Hindi pa pwede na elementary pa lang, tuturuan mo na kung anong condom, ano ang pills. Is that even age appropriate? It's not. Okay? It's not age appropriate. Ha? In the same way, the common example na tinatanong sa atin ng mga bata is, di ba, sasabihin, Mama, Papa, saan po ako nanggaling? Okay? Saan po ako nanggaling, Mama and Papa? Tapos sasabihin, alam mo, nanggaling ka sa puwet. Okay? Nanggaling ka daw sa puwet. You came out of my anus. Parang ganun palagi yung sinasabi. Okay? Plus, you need to explain it on their own terms. Okay? So you can talk to them as Mama and Papa love each other, and then there are cells that combined, and later on they became you. Okay? As a baby. Okay? So you try to explain it to them. Huwag yung gawing bobo yung bata kasi class, pag sasabihin nyo na sa puwet ng galing yon, alam mo class kung anong gagawin ng bata? The next time na magpupup yan, the next time na magtatae yan, titingnan yung puwet, baka may baby na lalabas. Okay? So wag nyo silang gawing bobo, ha? But you don't tell them that mother and father had sex, and then when we had sex, there is a growth in the uterus, and then there is replication of the cells. Wag naman kayong ganon. Okay? So again, the main point is that you make it age appropriate. And then class, you also make it context appropriate. When we say context appropriate, ibagay po natin kung ano yung context ng pinag-aralan natin, particularly class on the culture. Particularly in the culture. Now, we could not deny the fact that using sex education as an example, for many Filipinos, the topic of sex education is still considered to be taboo. Di ba? Tabu pa rin talaga sa atin yung topic ng sex education. And many would actually say na wag yung turuan ng sex education yan. Baka mamaya kung anong gagawin. Actually guys, regardless if we will teach them or not, they will know about it. They will see it. Okay? They will see it. It's all around us already. So our viewpoint in education is that it's better for us to teach them rather than for them to know it from others who are not guided. Okay? It's better pa na malaman nila mula sa classroom yung sex at alam nila kung anong gagawin towards it rather than marinig nila sa kaklase nila tapos sabihin na maglalaro sila ng sex organs nila. Are you getting my point? No? But you need to be context appropriate. Halimbawa, topic natin values education. Tapos I'm talking about John 3:16. Tapos bigla ko na lang na-insert yung mga topics tulad nito. Di ba parang out of context? No? So dapat alamin niyo yung context. Ha? Tapos paminsan-minsan tayo namang mga teachers, kumbaga we do not walk our talk. No? So let's say for example, values education. Remember class that your students are actually learning from you. And when I say learning from you, they are not only learning from how you talk, but how you also act inside the classroom. Halimbawa, you're teaching them good manners and right conduct under values education. Tapos, nung nagkamali ng recitation ng isang classmate, sinabihan mo ang bobo. Okay? Or, for example, nagsabi ka ng bad words. Ano po yung marereflect sa student mo? Sabi ni ma'am, be kind to others, pero okay lang naman palang sabihin na bobo ka ng harap-harapan. Okay? So, they are actually mimicking your actions. They are actually mimicking your actions. Have you had your subjects in child development already? Have you taken childhood development? Hindi pa. Hindi pa siguro. Okay, so if you're in that subject, you try to learn, you try to learn those specifics. So be context appropriate. Then OBE, in OBE class, this is aligned in the principle that we have to have high expectations. So pag sinasabi ko pong high expectations, you are expected to see your students as capable individuals. Again, I would like to repeat, kapag yung teacher, ikaw bilang teacher, iniisip mo na bobo yung students mo, mag-change ka na lang ng profession. Ha? Mag-change ka ng profession. Teaching is not for you. If you are looking at students, if you are looking at pupils as idiots, if you are looking at them as individuals who are not capable of learning, they will not be capable of learning. Okay? That's not how a teacher sees students and pupils. As a teacher, you should have high expectations on them. So ano pong sa ibig sabihin ng high expectations? Hindi mo naman kailangan sabihin na, wow, ang galing nitong ni Apple. Sige, Apple, ina-expect ko, perfect mo yung exam mamaya. Okay? Or itong si Alvia naman, alam ko, Alvia, mapiperfect mo yung dance number mamaya. Hindi naman class na pinipressure mo yung student. Pero what you are delivering or what you are giving to them as a message is that you're believing in them. Halimbawa, class, may field demonstration, you can tell the students that, I know guys that you can do it. Or you can tell them that, I have seen that you have done your practice, I think you are capable of doing it. Okay? Huwag po kayong nagbibigay ng false reassurance. Halimbawa, for example lang okay? Kapag may student ka na si Jose, tapos alam mo naman na si Jose, kapag sumayaw, parang lahat ng paa niya left. Okay? Or parang lahat na lang right. Kung in other words, hindi siya marunong sumayaw. Don't tell Jose na, Jose, alam mo ang galing-galing. Okay? Class, alam ni Jose yung sarili niya. So ano pong mafe-feel ni Jose? Itong si ma'am, itong si sir, iniinsulto na naman ako. Okay? So instead, you can tell him, Jose, I know you have done your practice. I hope that you will be able to do well later. Okay? I trust that you will be able to do well later. Huwag kayong exage kapag nagbibigay ng puna. Huwag kayong exage pag nagbibigay ng compliment sa students nyo. Make it realistic. Okay? Then, the next principle is assessment should be as authentic as possible. This is the goal that we have. No? This is the goal that we have. You need to be authentic as possible. So, you are reminded that there are 3 classifications also of assessment: for learning, of learning, and as learning. And dito po pumapasok si authentic assessment. Yan po yung goal natin. So class, when we talk about authentic assessment, the key word there is that there should be real life situations. And that is actually the challenge that we have. No? How can we make our students understand that this is applicable for real life situations? Now, let's speak, for example, TLE. Di ba, class, pag titingnan natin yung TLE, may drawing tayo diyang ginagawa. Eh. Anong tawag mo ng drawing na yan? Yung parang mga 2D, 3D. Di ba? May ganun din kayo sa TLE nyo. Anong tawag yun ng drawing na yan? Sinisearch ko na nga lang kung anong tawag ng drawing. Ayan, orthographic. Have you been through that? Nakita niyo kung anong drawing? Mga orthographic projection. Okay. Itong mga batang hindi nakaka-relate, nakakainis. Wala na bang ganito sa TLE? Niloloko niyo ako eh. Okay, wait lang. Sana nga ba yung... dito ako magsi-search. Okay. Tingnan natin yung orthographic. May ganun eh. May ganito ba kayo sa RLE nyo? Pa-heart react naman. Naranasan nyo bang ganito sa RLE? Have you been through that? Kaya na magdodrawing ka ng 3D, yung parang may yung triangle yung ginagamit. Diba? Okay. Magaling ako nito eh. Basta may ruler class na drawing, kaya ko yan. Pagkatapos class, you have your isometric. May isometric drawing yan. Okay? Now, on the first plates, no? On the first plates that your students are doing, okay lang yan class, no? That you will ask them to draw that you will guide them on how to do a simple three-dimensional object. So okay lang, kahit ganito lang muna class first. Okay? But later on, if you would want them to practice authentic assessment, you can ask them to bring a three-dimensional object and then they will try to draw it. You need to make them understand that the purpose of this drawing is for you to view. Okay, for you to view class the different views of that three-dimensional object. Tapos paano pa nila ito ma-apply sa life nila? Class, you can ask them actually, for example, to draw their room or even just to draw a cabinet in their room if how they would want it to be situated. Okay? Para class later on, alam mo na kapag sa real life, magagamit nila to kapag magpapatayo na sila ng bahay, kapag magpapatayo na sila class ng cabinet nila, or something, so they will be able to apply it. Do not just make your students draw plates like this forevermore tapos hindi nila alam kung saan nila gagamitin. Are you getting my point? Diba kadalasan, we just ask to draw, and then what? And then what? So you need to make assessment as authentic as possible. Now, for example, if you're talking about environmental science, no? In the sciences, di ba may specific tayo na environmental sciences? So class, you can ask them to form their anong tawag natin dyan? You can ask them to have their mini ecosystem. For example, ecosystem class yung topic nyo for the semester. So you ask your students to make a mini ecosystem. Okay? Now, sasabihin ng students, paano gagawin yan? So you guide them as to how to do it. And then later on class, you are actually giving them an opportunity to observe life in that ecosystem. Yung mini ecosystem nila, pwede nilang gamitin sa bahay. And you're also giving them opportunities kung paano sila makapag-negosyo later on if they would want to. Okay? So, kumbaga, you're focused into products, you're focused into real life applications. Di ba? Oftentimes, actually, ang hindi sinasabi sa atin ng students is that, ang hindi sinasabi ng students natin is that, why are we learning that? Okay? Diba? Sometimes they would ask, for what? Why do I need to memorize this? Why do I even need to know the Pythagorean theorem? O doon sa mga math major. Okay? Diba? Sometimes tatanungin, why do I even need to know the Pythagorean theorem? Why do I even need to compute for the area of the square, the area of the circle? What's the use of that? Okay? So, show real life applications. Papuntahin nyo sa bahay nila, ask them to measure the walls of their home, ask them to measure class kung gaano kalapad yung room nila, kahit boarding house ng Manila, and then ask them to make or to compute for the area of their boarding house. That way, they will be able to understand, later pala, pag bibili ako ng tiles, or sige, kasi medyo purita pa tayo, pag bibili tayo ng linoleum lang muna, sa susunod lang yung tiles. Alam ko kung gaano kalapad na linoleum yung bibilihin ko. Are you getting the point? So you make them apply it in real life. That's the challenge for us teachers. Okay? Remember, that you are making your students learn because you would want them to survive life and to become better professionals later on. Hindi pwede na sasabihin ng student by the time mag-graduate, na wala man din natudlo ni ma'am, daw wala din natudlo sa eskwelahan, daw wala gid ko may nabalaan sa eskwelahan kag lain man sa real life. Okay? You don't make your students say that. So you need to teach them and allow them to learn through authentic experiences. Okay? So that's it, class, for the principles of assessment. Unless if you have any questions in mind.